Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and in this episode we're going to kick off our multi-episode tour of our bookshelves and the comics on them. The video linked above is a brief introduction to the whys and the wherefores of doing this series of videos, as well as contains some minor points on my personal philosophies in collecting and how I'm going to approach this series. Check that out if you haven't already. If you've already gone through the introduction and the caveats, or otherwise are just interested in getting straight to the books, let's jump into what I'm going to creatively label Shelf 1. This is probably the oldest bookshelf I own. I've had it since I was in high school at least, if not earlier. At one point of time it was full of Penguin Classics editions, at another point of time it was full of He-Man and Masters of the Universe action figures, and today I think of it as my trade paperback shelf. Most of my TPBs reside on this shelf, although I do have a few scattered in the other ones, and most of what's on this shelf is TPBs, although there are of course hardcovers and singles in this as well. It's a good place to start because it represents a good range of comics, I think, although it does lean a bit towards the big two, Marvel and DC, as well as Image Comics, which is not necessarily the case with the rest of my collection. But it also has a variety of formats alongside the TPBs, including some unique formats that are only found on this shelf. So we actually start in the top row with single issues, not bound volumes or trade paperbacks at all. These are all bagged and boarded, and over here are the 75 issues of the Sandman, the classic comic series by Neil Gaiman and various artists. This is one of my favorite series. I've covered it in a number of different videos right at the beginning of this channel's videos, and I just love having these single issues out here. For one, they save me a lot of space in the place where I regularly keep these issues, but also I can randomly draw out things like issue 50, Ramadan, or Dream of a Thousand Cats, those self-contained short stories that Sandman is so very good at. Even if you wanted to read an arc, I often have 4 or 3 issues bagged together so that I can draw out an entire arc and read it in singles without having to open too many bags and manage too many boards. Right at the end over here, we also have some Death issues, the mini-series, and Sandman Midnight Theatre. Then I have some volumes of Love and Rockets new stories by the Hernandez brothers. I'm a big fan of Love and Rockets. Now, there are some bits of Love and Rockets, there are some stories and arcs that are not as accessible as others, at least for me, but what is good and what does work for me works so well that I'm really ready to follow Love and Rockets in any iteration as long as the brothers want to continue it. This is actually the third series. The first series was magazine sized, the second was comic, and the third series are these square bound volumes that came out once a year. This is the only one of them that's in plastic because it's autographed by both Jaime as well as Gilbert, signing as Beto as he always does, and that's why I took the care to put this in plastic, whereas the others just sort of stay out here without any other protective covering. I'm Not a Plastic Bag is a very interesting comic that I found in a used bookstore about a sentient pile of garbage. It definitely has an environmental message, but it's also extremely clever and extremely inventive in its use of imagery and what little text there is in a way that I found very unique. Quite a surprising find. I did not expect this to be as good as it was when I found it. After that, over here are 3 used books I bought by Warren Ellis. So there's Fell, Switchblade Honey, and Cressy. Switchblade Honey is okay, Cressy is a little better, but it's very short, and I think my favorite of these 3 is definitely Fell, Feral City, particularly because of the spectacular artwork in it, but the story is very good as well. And it is self-contained, although it says volume 1. I don't think there was ever a volume 2. I'm not sure. Let me know if there is, because I would really like to read some more of that. Here's a copy of Ursula by Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon that I was lucky enough to get autographed by them when they came to New Delhi Comic Con some years ago. The first and one of the very few trade paperback collections of Castle Waiting, The Lucky Road. Volume 1 of The Autumnlands by Kurt Busiek, a sort of fantasy, Dungeons, Dragons, Minotaurs, Monsters sort of thing that I didn't enjoy as much as I thought I would, given the subject matter, which seems right up my alley, and the author, who I'm a big fan of. And then I've got some random volumes over here. Volume 3 of Criminal, Volume 3 of MySpace Dark Horse Presents, which is really an anthology series that Dark Horse used to publish, and I love this one. It's got a story by Mike Mignola, it's got a Buffy story, it's got a Serenity story, and it has an Usagi Yojimbo color story, and it's a great story. It's a fantastic little scene in which someone challenges Usagi, and I mean, he doesn't even break a sweat, and he proves himself a master, which he is, with very little effort. It's just a terrific little Usagi story, and I'm really glad to have it in that anthology. Lovecraft, which is a very peculiar and very interesting book. It's a biography of H.P. Lovecraft, but it takes Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, if you've seen that movie, it takes that sort of approach, like what if what he was writing about was all true. So half of it is this straight up biography of this possibly mentally disturbed author genius, and the other half of it is a Lovecraftian horror story. I didn't expect this to be as good as it is, so I was quite surprised. This is from Vertigo. This shelf also could be labeled the Vertigo shelf because it has a lot of my Vertigo books and my earliest Vertigo books in there. Lovecraft wasn't one of the earliest books I read. I really picked that up because it was published by Vertigo, and I was surprised at how compelling it was. Then we have Mark Waid and Fiona Staples' Archie, Volume 1, which I enjoyed, but not enough to continue. Again, it's surprising. I like Fiona Staples' art on Saga. I love most of what I've read by Mark Waid, and this was good, but I just haven't felt the need to pick up Volume 2. And then in a similar note, there are a bunch of Image Volume 1s. The good thing about Image is that they price their Volume 1s quite reasonably, and even in India, over here, it translates to decent prices for the most, at least relatively speaking. So you can try them out without spending too much and see if it's a series you want to continue with. So there's Injection Volume 1, Low Volume 1, East of West Volume 1, and Pretty Deadly Volume 1. Again, there's really no reason for me not to read Volume 2s of Injection, Low, East of... I mean, now that I think about it, I remember good things about all of these books, but I mean, there's so much to read that what we buy Volume 2s of and what we commit that much time to really needs to be spectacular, I think. So, or it's got to have something of interest. I think I will try East of West Volume 2. I'll probably try Low Volume 2 as well. Injection, I'll give it another read and see what happens. From something you're not sure about to something that there is no doubt about, volumes of Swamp Thing. I have Alan Moore's 6 volumes in a later shelf. These are interesting editions that I found from a friend who sold them to me online on Facebook, and these are the Alan Moore, Steve Bissett, John Totalbin run, but in black and white, which I had never seen before. They're UK imprints from Titan Books, and it's fantastic having them in black and white. I love this series. I love Alan Moore's run, and the colors are a big part of it, but it's very interesting to me to have this other version. People who watch this channel know that I like to look at color comparisons and black and white to color and recoloring and things like that. I hope I can one day find the other 2 volumes and have all 6 in black and white. I only have 4 right now. And then 2 volumes of The Unwritten by Mike Carey, which is a very literary and a very clever series. I've enjoyed both of these volumes so far. The only reason I've stopped is because I realized there are hardcover deluxe editions, or at least one hardcover deluxe edition out there, and I thought that's the way I'd like to continue reading this, because I did enjoy it, although it's been a while since I looked at it. All right, now we'll move on to the second section of the top row, which contains Mouse in 2 volumes. And you don't really need me to tell you about Mouse. It's one of the most significant, one of the most famous pieces of comics literature to be ever written, the first to win the Pulitzer Prize for Literature, and it's terrific, by Art Spiegelman. I like having them in 2 volumes, although there is a big fat 1-volume edition available. I like having the 2 stories separately like this. It's more manageable, more readable, but also you feel the 2 halves of the story better, I think, in this format. This shelf used to contain the Bone colored paperbacks from Scholastic, but I recently gifted them all to my young nephew. So I had this space which has now been filled by Scholastic's Amulet. So there's a little box set of 3 paperbacks over here and 3 more that we got really cheap. I mean, it was literally a couple of dollars each, I think is what it translates to. And so we jumped at the chance because we'd heard so much about it and got these 6 books. I've only read the first 2 and it's good, but it's not blowing me away just yet. Unlike Jeff Lemire's Ghost Stories and Country Nurse, volumes 2 and 3 of Essex County. I've lent out volume 1 currently to someone who's going to see if they want to follow up with 2 and 3. I'm pretty sure they will, because Essex County is a terrific book and my favorite Jeff Lemire till date. Also in the Scholastic family are the Raina Telgemier books. So here's Smile and Sisters, available in a box set, and Ghosts, which I recently featured in one of my videos. These are all brought out by Scholastic's Graphics imprint, which also brought out the Bone color editions, of which I'm only left with the Bone handbook now. A little sort of information catch up, what's happening, the background and of the characters and the history of Bone. It's not essential reading, but it's fun to have, and it's good to have in this format if you have all the paperbacks. But my nephew's, I think, a little too young. I mean, he's probably too young for all of Bone, but I kept the handbook for some reason. And speaking of Bone, here's a very interesting edition of Bone. It's a slipcase containing 3 black and white volumes. This one is book 2, which features the Dragon Slayer, Rockjaw, and Old Man's Cave as Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And book 2 is called Solstice. I think another one is called Vernal Equinox. I forget what the third one is called, but those are the 3 books that make up the Bone series. Unfortunately, I've not been able to find any other slipcases, so the middle slipcase is all I have. The second shelf continues with some interesting editions of Bone. Here we have Bone Book 1, 2, 3, The Adventure Begins. The hardcover collection of the first 3 Bone volumes in color. The Adventure Begins is followed by The Saga Continues, I think, and then the Epic Conclusion. So 3 big hardcovers collect the entire 9 volumes of the Bone saga. I believe this edition was only published in Canada. That's what the guy who sold it to me told me. I bought it off eBay, and it's signed and sketched by Jeff Smith. So it's a nice addition to my collection. And over here we have the original hardcovers of Bone in black and white, which were published as the series was being published, unlike the color, which was done after the series had completed. In between volume 1 and volume 2, I actually have a copy of this Classics Illustrated of Moby Dick, which I recently purchased, but arrived a little banged up, so I've got it between 2 hardcovers, sort of flattening it out. I thought that was fitting, given that Moby Dick is Fawn Bone's favorite book. Then over here, we've got some Image books that I like and I am keeping, unlike the ones on the top shelf, which I had not made my mind up about. Chrononauts, book 1 by Millar and Murphy, which I quite enjoyed. I don't always enjoy Millar World books, but Chrononauts was fun and it went in directions I wasn't expecting. It says book 1, but again, I don't know if that means that there is a book 2 or book 3. I've never seen any. Then Starlight, also Millar World, by Mark Millar and Goran Parlov, which is superb. It's a recent read of mine. It was introduced to me by people online who recommended it very highly, and it definitely is. I'm not a big fan of Kick-Ass. I'm not a big fan of Wanted. Mark Millar is, I can take him or leave him most of the time, but Chrononauts is a lot of fun, and Starlight is just wonderful. It's a straight story in the way that it isn't about a twist or subversion. It just plays it very straight, and it's quite heartfelt, and I enjoyed it. So Chrononauts and Starlight are 2 Millars that I enjoy. Then volume 1 and volume 2 of Brandon Graham's Prophet. I guess it's a resetting of book that Image used to publish in the early 90s. I think I've seen 1 or 2 of those. Weren't interesting, but this was fantastic. It really captured my imagination. The kind of science fiction this has is something I really enjoy. I don't necessarily understand all of it, but I do love the kind of scope and the epic nature of this story. I don't know if Brandon Graham continues with volume 3 or but these 2 books by themselves were very, very good. as was Giant Days by John Allison, which which I think is one of the best series going on right now. It's very funny, it's very touching, it's about friendship, it's about college, it's really beautifully drawn, it's fantastically written. I can't recommend this series enough. It's light, but also sort of deep about life in some ways. I was a fan of John Allison's Bad Machinery. Unlike Bad Machinery, Giant Days isn't drawn by him, but it's equally wonderful. So there are 5 volumes over here. I think there is a 6th volume out from Boombox that I'm going to get. I recently found that there are hardcover deluxe expensive editions of Giant Days as well, and now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do about that because I've already invested in 5 volumes of trade paperbacks. If switching over to a hardcover, I like to do it early so I don't spend too much money on double dipping. Although, you know, if it's gotta happen, it's gotta happen. Then I have volumes 1, 2, and 3 of Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chiang. This is a series I have really enjoyed so far. I'm a fan of Brian K. Vaughan. This is no exception. It's not as great as some of the stuff of Vaughan's that I really, really like, but it's quite entertaining and I wouldn't mind continuing reading past volume 3. Then we have Alex and Ada by Jonathan Luna and Sarah Vaughan, which was a recommendation again from people online, and I wasn't sure what I'd think of it, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the story was cracklingly good. The characterization was great. It reminded me a bit of the movie Her about artificial intelligence and emotions. This was a surprise of a series. I did not expect to enjoy Alex and Ada as much as I did. Which is also sort of the case for Lumberjanes, which is a young adult sort of comic book written by Noel Stevenson, who also wrote Nimona, which is a great book. And I really enjoyed these 2 volumes. I don't know if I need to read more than these 2 volumes. They were enjoyable, but I'm not necessarily enamored to the extent where I want to continue, but I like what I had over here, and I'm definitely keeping these 2 books. Moving along, we have 2 volumes of Girls, which again was one of those surprising things. This is what Image does. They put out comics that I'm not sure that I'm going to like, and then when I read them, I do like them, and they're not necessarily the more famous ones or the ones that are more out there and the ones that are more bizarre and the ones that are more violent, although I have enjoyed some of those. But I didn't like East of West and Pretty Deadly as much as I liked Girls and Alex and Ada. It might have something to do with the Luna brothers and Jonathan Luna. It may have something to do with the material, but Girls was interesting. I didn't think I would like it, and I did. Then we have Redlands by Jordi Belair, which I have just received, so I haven't got around to reading this yet, but I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard a lot of good things about this book, and this is up there. Sleepless is a volume I read for the first time this summer, and I really enjoyed it. I'm waiting for the 2nd volume to come out. And then we have book 1 and book 2 of Jupiter's Legacy, which I've bought recently but haven't gotten around to reading yet. It's sitting on the shelves waiting for their turn like so many books are, but I definitely plan to get around to them very soon. Here in the second part of the second shelf, we have more single issues, including Akira, brought out by Marvel Comics under their Epic Comics imprint. And these are the color left to right Western styled version of Akira. I have almost all of them. It's until issue 34, so I'm missing the last couple, which are extremely expensive for collectors' reasons, but it's great to have this, and for the longest time this was the only way that I had read Akira until the 35th anniversary edition. Again, I have a video on that, and I've also done a comparison between the color and the westernized series right here and the 35th anniversary box set. Moving along, we have the Groo Chronicles, which are collected editions but in a squarebound comic form. So they take the first issues of Groo and put 2 of them into a single issue. These are fantastic stories. They're very funny. I love Groo, and it's great to have the original Groo stories in this high quality paper and high quality printing. The original issues were not as high quality as these reprints were. So I have 6 issues of the Groo Chronicles, which collect the original 12 Groo issues. After Groo, we have From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell. This is my favorite Alan Moore. and I love having them in these issues. Mad Love and Kitchen Sink Press. And after that, we have Fritz Lieber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories, adapted by Howard Chaykin and art by Mike Mignola. I got this for the talent involved. I am not actually familiar with the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser series, except for their brief appearance in Fables. Finally, completing the thick square-bound comics collected on this shelf are issues of The Escapist. Based on Michael Chabon's Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay and the hero created by them in that story. These comics are great fun because they create an entire history for The Escapist, including news and comic books from the time and lost comic books, which are just a lot of fun to read. On the third shelf, we have some more assorted trade paperbacks. There's Vertigo's Sweet Tooth by Jeff Lemire. I'm not sure how his name is pronounced. Sweet Tooth was a lot of fun. It was weird and odd, and at the same time, it was quite emotionally resonant. I'm a fan of Lemire at most times, and I actually like his artwork. It's very quirky, and it suits this material really, really well. In fact, I like this enough to collect the rest of it in deluxe hardcovers, and that's why I only have one volume of this paperback. Then we have Proposition Player by Bill Willingham. It's by Willingham and about poker, which is why I picked it up. It's not bad. Blood and Water, which is a vampire story a friend recommended to me, but I wasn't really very enthusiastic about it. It was better than I expected it to be. Again, because it had emotional resonance where I really wasn't expecting any. Then we have Grant Morrison's Aztec, The Ultimate Man, and American Splendor, Another Dollar, which is the second volume of Harvey Picar's American Splendor stories with Vertigo, much, much later in his career. The Twilight Children is a collaboration between Darwin Cook and Gilbert Hernandez, two of my favorite creators, so I just had to pick it up. This is a nice little spooky kind of story with beautiful art by Cook, and the combination of Darwin Cook and Gilbert Hernandez does not disappoint. I enjoyed this particularly because of the way the writing and the art go together, which is something I'm glad to have seen. This is Dead at 17, I think it's a young adult series by Josh Howard. I didn't want to spend a lot of money on a lot of volumes, so I was glad to pick up this Ultimate Edition, which collects, I think, 3 different volumes, mini-series into this, and it's an autographed copy. It's kind of dark, it's kind of funny, it's good, but I think it may be for younger readers than me, maybe 17. Then we have a couple of volumes of Hulk Visionaries, the Peter David stories. I have volume 3 and volume 5. I've picked these up randomly at bookstore sales, so not really collecting them per se, but I enjoyed these, and I'm glad I have them for reference. I like Peter David's Hulk stories and would be interested in reading more, but I'm just not seeking out the others. Fantastic Four Visionaries, Walter Simonson, and Fantastic Four Visionaries, George Perez, volumes 1 in the case of Perez and 3 in the case of Simonson, again picked up from bookstore sales. I enjoy them, not really something I want to pursue. Monstress is a new series that I've just tried out. It comes highly recommended and has had an award-winning year, really. Eisner's, Harvey's, the whole shebang. And it's great. The art is fantastic. The story is interesting. It's not hooked me completely. I think I need to give it another shot. So I'm going to reread volume 1 before I decide I want volume 2 or not. It's just so many people say it's fantastic. I must be missing something. Shazam Monster Society of Evil by Jeff Smith. This is, but yeah, like a reboot of Shazam, starting from the beginning, an origin story done in, you know, in Jeff Smith's very charming style. If you're a fan of Bone, if you like Razzle, this is going to be right up your alley. I enjoyed this. I like this Shazam. It's okay. I don't need to read more. I like having this volume. Then I've got some random paperbacks, again, that I've collected because of sale or traded. There's a 52 volume 2, which I've never read. Flash Race Against Time, which I think I read. A couple of Valiant Harbinger Wars, which I didn't get into. Divinity, actually, I liked. Thought that was interesting and had an interesting premise and execution. I wouldn't mind reading more Divinity. Then some volumes of Ultimate X-Men, again, just whatever I could pick up. Kingdom Come by Mark Waid and Alex Ross, of course, the classic. I only have this in trade paperback format. I wouldn't mind getting an absolute edition. I'm not a big fan of giant omnibuses, but there are certain books that deserve the absolute oversized deluxe treatment, and Kingdom Come is definitely one of those. This is again an autographed copy by Mark Waid from when he was at Delhi Comic Con, which is why it gets a little bit of a plastic cover. Another one of my new acquisitions, Doom Patrol by Gerard Way and Nick Derrington. This was very enjoyable. I'm a fan of the classic Doom Patrol revival by Grant Morrison, and this seems to be in that tone. I was less enamored by Nextwave, which is a mini-series, I think, that came highly recommended by a number of people whose opinion I really respect. It was just a little, I don't know, juvenile for me, but I'm going to give it another shot because, as I said, the people who recommended this are very smart. So again, I want to make sure I'm not missing something. No such controversy with Trouble. Everybody hates it. One of the worst books in my collection, but at least it's a hardcover, dust-jacketed premiere edition, right? This is a really, really famously bad book. I did not know what it was. I had not heard of it when I bought it. I bought it as a part of a lot of comics, and now it just has an interesting place in my collection, so I can say that I have it. Five Ghosts from Image is a series that I did not really enjoy. It seemed to me a little derivative. It had an interesting idea, but it's been done before and it couldn't put a fresh spin on things, was the opinion I had of the first volume, which is why I never continued. On the other hand, The Flintstones by Mark Russell, a relatively recent book, is just fabulous. I could not believe how good a Flintstones book was. Mark Russell's done a phenomenal job of making it contemporary and urgent and at the same time quite funny. I'm interested in seeing how the second volume is, if it can be sustained, but this is a definite buy, strong recommendation from me. Sheriff of Babylon by Tom King, powerful. Wouldn't really call it enjoyable, but definitely worth reading at least once. Unlike the Mark Waid and Fiona Staples Archie, which I liked but didn't love, Afterlife with Archie was fantastic. I cannot wait for the second volume. It's been long delayed. I've almost considered trying to get the single issues from the United States in order to read the rest of this story. It's very well done. It's superbly written. Excellent, excellent art. It's just haunting and gory and touching, but what I really appreciated was it was done with a full sense of Archie. I haven't read Archie since I was very young, but when I was very young I read a lot of Archie, and Afterlife with Archie, it knows it's Archie. I mean, there are side characters and there are things they do with main characters, and Smithers being an Alfred type ex-military butler type. I mean, it's so natural and so interesting. It works for me completely. The Goon Chinatown, and this is a great standalone read that you can check out to see if you're interested in the Goon or not. I like the Goon. I like the whole series. As much of it as I've read, I've really enjoyed. Then we have The Amazing Screw on Head by Mike Mignola. Terrific book, very funny, very smart. I love it. Perhaps my favorite Mignola outside of Hellboy, and probably better than some Hellboy. Then we have volumes of The Spirit as reimagined and restarted by Darwin Cook, based of course on the classic Will Eisner hero. I have I have 4 volumes. I think there are a total of 6, but Darwin Cook doesn't draw and write all of them. But Mark Evanier writes, Sergio Aragone writes, and they're all good. It's classic adventure storytelling that does true justice to the original. I really like this series. Sleeper Season 1, Sleeper Season 2 by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Sleeper is one of their many, many collaborations. I like it. It's not their best, but I like it. Then we get to Transmetropolitan, a gonzo kick-ass series. I really love this series. I read it when I was starting to get back into comics, and it just blew my mind. More than Preacher, more than 100 bullets. It was Transmetropolitan from the Vertigo stable that really taught me how mainstream popular comics, I'm not talking about superheroes, but mainstream popular comics could be really angry and political and nasty without being absolutely inaccessible to someone like me. So I'm a big fan of Transmetropolitan. It has waned a little bit over the years. It was many years ago that I first read it and was blown away. I was younger then. I think some parts of it are not as effective as they used to be, but it's still a galloping good read, better than so much more than is out there, and definitely my favorite Warren Ellis stories. Great stuff. Check out Transmetropolitan if you have not already. And finally, we finished the shelf with a few more Vertigo titles. There's DMZ by Brian Wood, which I really enjoyed. It has its ups and downs, but on the whole, it was a solid series that got better. Then it went downhill somewhere. I don't know, it was volume 5 or no, volume 6 or 7. I don't know. There were 2 volumes in the middle that I didn't like, but then it picked itself up really nicely. I think I still don't have the absolute last volume. I read it from a friend, so I know how the story ends. But it's just, I don't know, for some reason it's been very expensive, or I don't want to pay what it is. So I've got up to volume 12, but I am missing volume 13 of DMZ. Then there's Wicked and the Divine, volume 1, the Faust Act, which I really enjoyed. And this is another one of those that I've decided to pursue in hardcover deluxe editions. I don't know what happened with Manhattan Projects. I was really enjoying it. I read 3 volumes and then just never continued with it. I don't even know how many more there are, but I don't know. I guess I just lost interest and moved on to other things. Maybe one day I'll come back. Marvel 1602, a very interesting take on the Marvel Universe by Neil Gaiman. I think this might have been a better idea than the execution. The first couple of issues are a lot of fun to read, but after that gets a little tiring. For me, at least. And then there's some Dark Horse, Angel and Faith. I'm a fan of the Buffy universe, so I've tried to read the Buffy stories and comics. Some of them are better than others. These ones are okay, not great, not terrible. On the 4th row, we have some more Ultimate X-Men like we saw before, as well as Ultimate Spider-Man, which I really enjoyed as a series. This was quite a while back before I got back into comics in a big way, and this was one of those series that bridged my young childhood reading and my grown-up adult reading. This is sort of a gateway into me coming back into comics, even though it isn't necessarily grown-up reading or the kind of reading that I might be doing right now, but it was a good start. It was a fresh start. It was a take on a character I really enjoy. So I've tried to collect as many of these trade paperbacks as I can, although I am missing some. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't have 10 and 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I don't have 17, and then 19 to 22, I think. So those are the ones I'm missing, but I have read the whole series, again, borrowing from friends, and my sister has them. So I like that story. That also led me to try some other Spider-Man comics. Now, when I was young, Spider-Man was to me what Batman is to most people, I think. He was just my favorite superhero. He was the coolest. He was the one I liked. And his stories, along with Superman's, were the ones I really enjoyed as far as superhero stories are concerned. So these are some of the books that I picked up after reading Ultimate Spider-Man at various points of time. Again, depending on what was on sale, depending on what I found at bookstores, even a couple of used copies. So there's Red-Headed Stranger, Craven's First Hunt, Jackpot, Family Ties, Return of the Black Cat, and then Straczynski's Ultimate Collection Volume 1 and Volume 3. I'm missing 2 over here. Then there's also Spider-Man Visionaries by Kurt Busiek, which was a slightly different kind of Spider-Man Year 1 in some ways. It's the stories. Kurt Busiek went back and wrote stories about Spider-Man in high school between the major leaps that happened in the continuity. I enjoyed them. I like Kurt Busiek. These were fun stories. In general, I think I have more of a leaning to enjoy Spider-Man than many other superhero stories. Black Cat, The Evil That Men Do, The Fantastic Four and Spider-Man Silver Age, Spider-Man Fever, Anti-Venom, man, I don't remember some of these very distinctly. These are from a long time ago. These are some of the earliest comics that I bought. These will be between 12 and 15 years old for the most. I mean, unless there are some more recent ones thrown in there, but definitely nothing from the last 5 or 6 years for sure. After that is Love is Love, a comic book anthology that was brought out to benefit LGBTQA charities after the violence in Florida. And then we've got Astonishing X-Men Volume 1 by Joss Whedon and Cassidy, which I enjoyed. I just like the refreshed start. Not enough to continue with it though, for some reason. I thought I had more volumes of Astonishing X-Men, unless people have borrowed them from me. That seems to be the only one I have. Some new acquisitions, Straczynski's Thor, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which I'm planning on reading at some point of time soon. Superman's Secret Identity, again by Kurt Busiek, a beautiful, fantastic Superman story, one of my favorites. I waited for a long time for this to be reprinted in paperback, and now there's a deluxe edition of it out there. This is a great sideways take on Superman. It's about a kid named Clark Kent who's been teased about his name all his life until one day he discovers that he can fly and then starts developing heat vision, among other things, etc., etc. It's really a story that shouldn't work, but works wonderfully well. Thanks in no small part to the wonderful writing of Busiek and the fantastic art by Stuart Immonen. This is one of my favorite Superman stories, really. On this side, I have a couple of volumes of Showcase. Again, just stuff I've picked up on sale. Not really collecting them in any, so I've got Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 1 of The Unknown Soldier and The Ambush Bug 1. I like Showcase because they're a nice, cost-friendly way of getting a whole bunch of pages of original comics. So you can see how, certain series started out, how certain characters were introduced, etc. without spending a lot of money. The problem is that not all of these stories really stand the test of time. The Legion of Superheroes is maybe an exception. I really enjoy the Legion of Superheroes. I enjoyed Legion of Superheroes as a kid, so maybe I have a nostalgic attachment to that. But these stories were always fun. Some of the others, it's really about historical research and knowing how things unfolded rather than enjoying them by today's standards of character, action, plot, and science, so on. On this side, however, are some of my favorite books in my collection from Fantagraphics. This one's a Richard Sala collection of Peculiar. Peculiar is a character who appeared in Richard Sala's series Evil Eye from Fantagraphics, and this is a collection of all Peculiar stories, which I really love. They combine this naughtiness and this sexiness with this innocence and this 1950s Hammer Films sort of horror. It's a wonderful combination that works fantastically, and Sala is one of my favorite creators, particularly for the style he has and his wonderful lettering. I definitely recommend checking out Peculiar as a sampler of Sala's work. This is not a particularly valuable or autographed copy or anything like that. It's in plastic because it has this kind of matte cover. It's very grainy. It's fantastic and wonderful to touch when you're reading, but it's just a dust magnet, and these are the kind of books that are really hard to clean because the dust gets ingrained into that cover. So I decided to take the effort and wrap this one, although we may encounter other books with similar covers that have not been wrapped. And then we have the Fantagraphics books by Jason, a Norwegian writer-artist who is one of my current favorite creators. He's just fantastic. He works with deadpan, dead-eyed, anthropomorphic animals representing all his characters. For some reason, that's what he has picked. I Killed Adolf Hitler, a terrific time travel story about a world in which assassins are just a regular profession like carpenter, and someone hires an assassin to go back in time and, of course, kill Adolf Hitler. The Living and the Dead is a wonderful Romero-esque zombie comedy which goes places where a lot of zombie movies don't. So this is an interesting take on that genre. In general, Jason is wonderful at making mishmash of things and creating unique effects because of that. For example, The Left Bank Gang stars Ezra Pound, James Joyce, Ernest Hemingway, and F. Scott Fitzgerald as graphic novelists in 1920s Paris. They're very poor, they're not doing very well, and they decide to rob a bank, and then it becomes this fractured time Reservoir Dogs type of heist caper. It's incredible how those things have been put together by Jason in this wonderful story. This book, I think, is a great place to start reading Jason, to get a sense of his style and his sensibilities. And it's very funny, and it's very smart. It's very intellectual in some ways, and very silly and very B-movie in other ways. It's just indescribable how good it is. Shh is a collection of mainly silent shorts from earlier in his career. This is Hey Wait, his first English translation. Very heartfelt, very emotional, powerful story of two young friends and a childhood incident. And this is the first edition, which I was very happy to find, so I have them double bagged. All these books are double bagged, with one spine facing one way and the other way. Tell Me Something and Meow Baby are two other books from Fantagraphics of Jason's. The Iron Wagon is the most wordy of his books. He is generally a very laconic writer, but this is an adaptation of a mystery novel, a murder mystery, which is quite good and done in a very nice style, different color-wise from his other color or his black and white work. You Can't Get There From Here, another wonderful mishmash, this time of Bride of Frankenstein and Igors and scientists making monsters. It's great. Why Are You Doing This is a powerful and emotional work that you would be surprised that how much it packs into, again, this anthropomorphic animal sort of storytelling. Werewolves of Montpellier is a funnier, sillier, but again, strangely emotional story. Jason's power is in taking things that are silly and odd and weird mishmashes and then getting out of them emotion, and that's even more admirable because he always uses these animals with these sort of blank expressions and deadpan approach to things. It's really, you have to see it to believe it. Isle of 100,000 Graves, another powerful, emotional, and yet silly pirate-oriented story. I actually have two copies of this because one of them is autographed. Pocketful of Rain is a collection of his early works, but it was published much later, collected together after he'd become very successful. It's interesting. It's odd to see non-animals and human faces and different kinds of stories before he settled into the very successful and very evocative style that he has now. So it's good for fans and collectors, but this wouldn't really be the place to start unless you want to approach Jason chronologically. And then we have The Last Musketeer, which combines the Three Musketeers with John Carter, with more stuff that is, again, extremely funny and completely unique. And finally, we have The Bottommost Row, for which I've had to go handheld. I apologize if it makes anyone seasick. I'll try to keep it steady as possible. These are Vertigo trade paperbacks that I collected at the beginning of my collection, and the reading that I was recommended by people, and then reading that I was led to by reading stuff that I enjoyed. So because of Sandman, I got to Death Time of Your Life and Midnight Days and the Books of Magic. Characters from the Sandman and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing led me to John Constantine. Then we have Lucifer, which has 10 volumes and is an excellent series by Mike Carey. Not as good as The Sandman when The Sandman is at its best, but I think in some ways more consistent than Sandman and a lot of others. Lucifer may be one of the unsung heroes of the Vertigo line. I don't hear people talking about Lucifer as much as they talk about many of the more glamorous books that came out from the publisher. Doom Patrol by Grant Morrison is another really fun, crazy sort of series. You can understand where Morrison's reputation comes from when you read things like Doom Patrol, which was fairly early. I have a Black Widow trade paperback thrown in there some reason, it seems. Gotham Academy, which I enjoyed but didn't want to continue. Some Edge Forge comics that I bought online but didn't really get into. Grant Morrison's Animal Man, which I definitely got into. It's a fantastic series, very interesting storytelling, very cool takes on things that you think you know, and similar, I think, in many ways to Alan Moore and his deconstruction of superheroes. The Filth by Grant Morrison, on the other hand, is not something I enjoyed. I've tried to read it a couple of times. I just can't get into it. I've never actually completed it. JLA, Seven Soldiers of Victory. This is superhero Grant Morrison. I enjoy them, don't love them. Couple of Buffy the Vampire Slayer stories, I guess I picked them up secondhand. They certainly look run down, but I don't think they've made much of an impression. And then we get to Ex Machina by Brian K. Vaughan and Tony Harris, which is perhaps my favorite Brian K. Vaughan series. I mean, Brian K. Vaughan is famous nowadays for Saga. Before that, Why the Last Man. His novel Pride of Baghdad is fantastic. But Ex Machina, the series, is perhaps the tightest, the best written, the most entrancing of his series that I've read. This is my favorite. And Mitchell Hundred, the protagonist of Ex Machina, is one of my favorite comics protagonists. So I wish more people would read this. And then we just sort of peter out. I've got an Astro City volume left. I sold all my Astro City trade paperbacks because I upgraded to first edition hardcovers. I love Astro City. So I've still got Dark Age Book 1 hanging out here in paperback. I didn't want to sell that without having 2 to sell with it. American Virgin, a couple of volumes. Not bad, not great. 28 Days Later, Debbie Dressler's Summer of Love, something I really enjoyed and very interesting and very honest sort of storytelling. I just didn't understand why the color scheme was like this, but still, it's a great story about a summer of love and very well written. Really good.